Hello, everybody. Welcome to yet another episode of the Raw Men Podcast. This is episode number 25, and we are dealing with Texas politics today. We've got quite a panel before us. We're going to be talking about the Texas State Board of Education Revisionaries. And the people we have to talk about that are Alix Jules, representing the Dallas-Fort Worth Coalition of Reason, Jamie Farren, founder of Freethought Oasis of Amarillo, Glasser, Vice President of the Atheist Community of Austin, Tim Crookham, who's the co-president of Hispanic Secular Humanists, Vic Wang, President of Humanists of Houston, and Zack Kopplin with the Americans United for the Separation of Church and State. And, of course, my lovely wife, Lilandra. Welcome, everyone. Lilandra, do you want to start out today? You're muted.
Okay. Hello. Besides being his lovely wife, I'm also a curriculum specialist with the Texas Science Standards. I also co-write science educational videos with Arn on his channel, Living Science. I know everybody here on the panel personally because we travel around Texas a lot, and I've met everybody in person, and some of them I consider friends. And today we wanted to talk about, well, I don't know if I insulted some of you. You know what I mean. Okay.
We won't go into which ones you don't consider.
Or the friends. Okay. All right. Okay. So today I wanted to talk, and Arn wanted to talk with the different people from different regions around Texas. We have somebody from Austin with Russell, and we have two people from Houston with Zack and Vic. And Zack is a transplant because he's going to school from Louisiana. Vic is the organizer of Houston Humanists, and he organized the Texas Freethought Convention that had the last appearance of Christopher Hitchens. And
one of the not myself, certainly.
Well, he helped. Okay, and we have an organizer from Amarillo, and also Tim Crookham, Hispanic Secular Humanist, and he's also from the Dallas area. And we have Alix Jules, who organizes a lot of things in the Dallas area. He's all around, and he speaks at atheist and secular conferences too. We kind of have a Texas coalition of reason here going on. We are missing East Texas and San Antonio, but they had prior commitments. So what let's talk about first is how someone contacted me, a family, and she said she had other families that were interested in our education, in our textbooks, and in the school board. So let's first talk about how the new textbooks are coming out this year. They're already printed and on their way. And I won't tell you, there's an article, and I know more about it, but I can't tell you why. And let's talk about Moses first. How a dictator, theocratic dictator, is somehow the influence for our United States style of government. I don't know who wanted to start us off there.
I'll jump in on that.
Okay.
And this comes from state standards in Texas that the State Board of Education adopted a few years back that basically cite Moses as one of the people with a great influence on America's founding. And that just translated into the textbooks because textbook publishers have to write to these standards. So they also explained how Mosaic law, apparently some of these textbooks, many of these textbooks, cite Mosaic law as an influence on the Constitution, and we had state board members who were insisting that Mosaic law influenced British common law, influenced American law, was the argument that was being made for having Moses in an extremely prominent place in the American legal tradition, which of course is historically inaccurate, but it's what we're teaching in Texas.
If I can just jump in for a minute, for people who are watching outside of Texas, you should be aware that the reason you should care about Texas politics and what happens in the school board is that the state of Texas is so big that when a bunch of rubes decide on what kind of material should be in the textbooks, if our school board rejects the textbooks, then a lot of book publishers generally just can't afford to publish these books, so they will jump through as many hoops as they need to satisfy the criteria that the Texas School Board puts up to them. And so those books wind up being used in lots and lots more states besides just Texas.
Well, also to expand on what Zack was saying, I think most of the people listening to this probably are aware of this, but, the Constitution is a completely secular document. There is only one, the only time religion is referenced at all in it is when it talks about not having, state religion. And so, as far as the influences of what went into writing it, there was actually quite substantial documentation from the writers themselves, who wrote about the process of compiling, of crafting the Constitution, where they actually explicitly referenced what their sources were, what historical figures influenced their writings, and never mentioned Moses, never mentioned. There is certainly no indication whatsoever that Moses or Mosaic law was an influence into the Constitution. I mean, it's really not even a matter of debate.
Well, and if I may, I'd like to say the basis of the argument, from my perspective, that Moses had an influence or some substantial influence on current law or on society or on the founding of the nation, the entire tone of the argument is 6 degrees of separation. I could use the exact same format of the argument to claim that Plato was really at the core of the founding of this nation, or I could claim perhaps any figure I wanted out of literature that the founders would have known at the time. When you hear the arguments again in favor of Moses, they are strained and contrived, and this isn't unlike what we've seen before with the Texas School Board of Education. Anybody here or anybody in Texas probably remembers McElroy when he was on the school board. This is the man who made infamous the quote, somebody has to stand up to these experts. So and if anybody hasn't seen it, you should watch Stephen Colbert, where he has him interviewed, and he has this great lampoon where he says, "You're a dentist, aren't you? Well, I'm going to stand up to you, expert. I think sugar's great for teeth," and he goes on and on and on. Anyway, so these sorts of contrived explanations are clearly dangerous when the majority of the people on the school board are of one particular ideological bent. There is one piece of good news for Texas, and that is since about 2011, the law has been such that, although many districts are not doing it yet, it is legally possible now for districts to purchase school books with or without the state board's approval. And so if there's any way through this, I really think that what we should be doing is more grassroots, more local push, so that we can destroy sort of that monopoly that Texas has over the textbook system.
Well, I think that's great for places like Austin, where obviously we get good quality books in a lot of school districts, but I would worry about some of the more, like, if we're going to try to play on a lack of state standards, that could potentially go even worse for all the little towns and very right-wing areas of Texas that could just flat out use the Bible as textbooks.
Jamie, you mentioned McElroy and his line about standing up to the experts. Just a quick little story on that. I actually called him out on that statement to his face and in front of an audience, and basically pointed out that that's exactly what scientists do. That's what science is all about, is standing up to each other, trying to prove each other wrong, trying to overturn whatever may be. If there's established science that's incorrect, it's all about trying to prove that wrong. And he actually all but backed off of that statement. He pretty much all but retracted it, I should say. I mean, he basically painted it as something he said in the heat of the moment. He was emotional. It was a bad time for him, and he just blurted it out. Was kind of how he portrayed it. That was about a month before he went on the Colbert Show, actually, and then he reused that line again right there on that show. So.
Okay, I had a comment on whether districts are going to adopt different textbooks than the mainstream textbooks like Pearson and McGraw-Hill. They can, I believe, do that. What the state does is it approves all the publishers that match about 50% of the standards that they made. So all the major publishers, if they want to be on the state approved list, have to put these standards about Moses in their books, or lose millions of dollars in the state of Texas. So it's kind of their fault and kind of not. And on the subject of whether you can adopt another textbook, possibly, and teachers can supplement the history material with actual primary source documents like the secession historical papers for reasons for why the state the states joined the Civil War, which is one of the other issues that's wrong in the history books. They can do that, but when the students go take the STAR and they don't answer the way that the questions are crafted from the text, then this could possibly reflect poorly on the teachers and test scores. So that's my contribution to that as a teacher there.
I think that also brings up a good point for students. If they're not getting the right education, the right information, then yeah, this is within Texas. But like you say, if they're going to take tests, but they're also going to hopefully go to college, and that college and other schools and other places, they take the GMAT or other educational curriculum elsewhere. They're going to be behind the in education, and they're going to set them. Right now, these educators or the school board is going to set these people up for a bit of a failure, and they're going to make it even harder for them to get even more educated if they're currently being taught things that or being, I guess, not taught the things that they need to know for that next level of education.
And what bothers me is that we're really not even talking about something that's on the students. I mean, like normally we'd be concerned about education, about whether the students are getting the lessons or so forth. But what we're talking about is not even whether the education system is failing because it's inclined to the test. What we're talking about in this instance is tantamount to propaganda, because we're talking about how the students are being led or misled to adhere to right-wing religious ideology in science and sex and social studies. They're being taught a whitewashed version of history. They're being taught a form of history where the Civil War is no longer about slavery, for example, and the Constitution is based on the Ten Commandments, and we have no ethnic authorities in respected positions. I mean, they've tried to remove everybody that it wasn't white, and that's why it's literally a whitewash of history. And when you have textbooks, as you have in Texas and in Louisiana, that not only don't say anything negative about the Ku Klux Klan, but do say negative things about, like, the Black Panther Party and so forth, and denigration of other ethnicities and other religions and so forth. They also say, like in one Louisiana textbook, they describe the Ku Klux Klan as respected community leaders promoting morality. Now, how is this not just overtly racist? This is a promotion of white supremacy in the textbooks.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, isn't the KKK no longer even in the latest version of the social studies curriculum? I believe it's not even in it at all.
They're there, but they don't negative about it.
That's
but
possible.
Where they do,
that's possible.
Yeah,
There's been several revisions, but there is a few things that are still there. Zach,
yeah.
And then Jamie.
It's also worth noting, while we're talking about the different revisions, that the State Board of Education changed hundreds of pages of all these textbooks the day before they were adopted, and most people who were involved with the adoption process, including pretty much all the board members, hadn't actually read the changes that they voted into the books. And so it was really unclear even what was adopted when it was adopted. And it's also worth pointing out that for all the stuff we've talked about where the textbooks are wrong, like where they said states' rights are the cause of the Civil War instead of slavery, Moses is the foundation of the American Constitution, they had one where they actually changed the question about the Great Depression from saying that, income inequality was a part of the Great Depression. They changed that to the Federal Reserve's monetary policy instead of income inequality, which is openly politically biased. But it could be even worse, because we've had board members try to remove Mexican American history because we have one board member, David Bradley, call it reverse racism, and said he's going to pull a Cesar Chavez and boycott the hearing on the Mexican American history course, which then he did, but the course still failed. So it could be much, much worse than we even have right now.
Yeah.
And then
I'm sorry.
Jamie, yes.
Oh, thank
Go ahead,
you.
Jamie. It's
I
you.
wanted to make sure I didn't I didn't jump in line there.
All right.
I currently am a student as well as being an employee of a university here in Texas, and so I have the pleasure and the misfortune of seeing these students leave high school and come directly into a university setting, and to connect this to what Arne had said earlier about about this being sort of a propaganda at the secondary or pre-secondary level. I at least see that when I'm interacting with individual students on any topic really, when they hear something either during a class or laboratory experience, or even during tutoring, or while researching an assignment, whenever they run into something that disagrees with what is clearly would be a conservative, sort of a normally expected view of history or of science or of anything, the reaction is something approaching a nervous breakdown in some cases. I mean, I have seen kids come close to tears, and when I say kids, I mean, in some cases we're talking early 20s, come close to tears, openly challenge the professor, which is fine, but we're talking openly challenging the professor on the basis of the Bible, on the basis of, well, but my parents said X, and it creates an incredible problem. And if there was a small proportion, then it would be a great learning experience for the rest of the people in the classroom. But since that one student echoes such a huge number of other students that haven't spoken out in that same classroom, it creates the opposite effect and tends to put peer pressure on those who might be more open to, a non-whitewashed view of education to be convinced of things like, well, Columbus was a great guy, and things like this.
And I believe it's Alex next, right?
Yeah,
Alex.
I really wanted to, I wanted to touch a little bit about the whitewashing and the potential impact on self-esteem that we know that actually happens when you take representation of people of color, black, brown, whatever. When you take them out of history, there's documented impact on what that's going to have on the education experience, etc. So as we start looking at the achievement gap that we've been measuring this for decades now, if we continue to put the kids in a position where they're going to continue on that trend and not close it, it's just going to continue to widen. And when you take a look at the board, it doesn't represent the diversity that we see in Texas. We're looking at numbers where the minorities, the quote-unquote minorities combined, are pushing 50%. You take a look at what they're doing in the board and how they want to revise the education standards. There's no reflection of what Texas looks like at all, let alone what the rest of the U.S. looks like.
That is true, and like they downplay segregation as some blacks had good education and some didn't, as if, right? And I know Alex has children in the Texas system. What are you going to say to them, Alex, when they come home and they say, well, teacher taught me that states' rights were the cause of the Civil War, Moses inspired our Constitution? What would you say to them?
We actually have this. We've had this conversation specifically over what's happened in South Carolina and what continues to happen in the 5 states where the flag still flies and is protected. Right? Why did the Civil War actually happen? Well, states' rights, but what were the states' rights about, etc. And so they come home and Fortunately, I can supplement that education, but not everyone's in that position. Again, when we start taking a look at children who are less advantaged or less privileged, they're not going to have that opportunity, and that really hampers Texas children. We're doing them a massive disservice, and I wish the legislator would understand that.
That's a good point. That not every parent has the time. Some people, both parents are working. They don't have a person that's at home full time, and they're doing well to check their students' homework, and to be able to research and figure out what they're being taught at school and try and supplement. Well, I recommend this anyways, to talk to your kids about what they're learning, but you can't put all of the burden on the parents. I think Jamie wanted to make a quick point about his children, and then Vic Wang and Russell wanted to weigh in.
Sure, thanks. I have an 8-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 13-year-old, and all three of them, of course, I live in Texas, so all three of them are in the Texas school system. Now, the kinds of issues we're talking about really aren't going to touch the 8-year-old just quite yet, but I've seen it for some time with my teenagers, and thankfully I raised them to challenge pretty much anything they hear that their BS detector goes off on, and so that's inconvenient at home, but it's good for them as people, and I've had numerous instances of them, my 14 and 13-year-old, coming home either individually or together, and telling me horror stories about, I mean, just as one example, okay, in multiple classrooms, in the office, and in the counselor's office, there are prominent religious symbols displayed on the walls, on every wall in some cases. These are the positions of power and discipline in the school system, and it concerns me, to say the least, to think about what that sort of, what kind of message that sends to the children. And I've had numerous instances where my children have come home and said, well, one of my teachers today said that black holes are really just kind of an idea that scientists have. We don't really know that they're real. And the teacher said openly in class, for instance, I don't think black holes are real because, I mean, God wouldn't do that. That just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, so, on the topic that came up earlier, on the whitewashing of the history, I think it's worth mentioning here, just how transparent it is that this is not just politically driven. I mean, this is flat out racism. I mean, look no further than, I think it was Arn who mentioned the elimination of some of the Hispanic figures in the fight for Texas independence. I mean, if they had any sense, you would think they would actually want to include that, just to show the legitimacy of Texas's independence from Mexico, that it wasn't just a white thing. Well, but here they are trying to eliminate them from the textbooks just because they happen to be, Mexican Texans who fought on the side of Texas. Look no further than the Revisionaries clip, the section where they were talking about musical influences in history, and they wanted to eliminate hip-hop and introduce or emphasize country music. I mean, it just doesn't get any more obvious that it is racially driven changes they're trying to make here. And they didn't just whitewash the Civil War and the KKK. They whitewashed Jim Crow, Brown versus Board of Education. I mean, the Civil Rights Movement, everything leading up to the Civil Rights Movement, essentially has been whitewashed or even eliminated, which is really a disgrace to the civil rights leaders, who, fortunately, they didn't remove them, but the fact that they are teaching about Martin Luther King and civil rights leaders without even providing the context of what it was they were fighting against, it essentially is a disgrace to their legacy, because it's like, imagine these kids reading about these civil rights figures, and it's like, okay, what was even the point of what they did if they don't understand what came before that?
And I just wanted to jump in while we were talking. Vic mentioned how they tried to take out hip-hop, or actually did take out hip-hop, and replaced it with country music. And there was just this quote from a board member, Pat Hardy, who she actually was okay with hip-hop, but she had the absolute wrong reason to be okay with it. And this is a direct quote. These people, she's talking about hip-hop artists, are multimillionaires. There are not enough black people to buy that. there are white people buying this. That was the judgment she was making on whether to include something in the textbooks, is if white people were okay with it. And that was what made it important or not. Again, these are the people who choose curriculum. I just want to sort of shout that from the rooftops.
Okay, Russell. Russell's
Jamie,
waiting patiently.
yeah. Well, Jamie brought up the point a few minutes ago that kids get to college and they are not prepared to have stuff taught in science classes and history classes that openly contradicts their religious upbringing. And of course, this is a problem that I run into a lot, and as a host of the Atheist Experience, I kind of make it my business to pay attention to what Christians are saying a lot on their radio shows and in their books. And what Christian right-wing homeschooling culture is really steeped on is the idea that college is a very dangerous and threatening place where their main motivation is to destroy your faith. And you have movies coming out like God's Not Dead, and I just heard they're announcing a sequel, where you have Kevin Sorbo playing in the first movie, this caricature of an ogre of a liberal philosophy professor whose whole teaching style is just ranting and raving at the kids. And there's a lot of talk about having to inoculate people against this. Now, I have a 13-year-old, and I've talked to a lot of atheist kids. Of course, they grow up their whole life being constantly challenged on what their opinions are. But a lot of Christian kids seem to grow up in this little bubble where the correct response to being challenged is not to think about the challenge and reason it out and argue with the people, but it's to shut down, because that is obviously Satan's influence trying to get at you and ruin your chances of getting into heaven. So it's no big surprise, and it's also no big surprise that Texas school board members, who by and large come out of these homeschooling environments, grow up with the belief that your faith is the most important thing in determining truth, and that's why they think they can trust scholars, so to speak, like David Barton, who just make up history out of whole cloth, and then they're like, well, that's going in the textbook because it sounds like what we want to be true.
All right, so it's interesting because we're talking about homeschooling, and I actually have kids in and out of the public school system for various reasons, but we're in and out, and we have exposure to Texas homeschools that can be really terrifying, quite honestly. There's a story that I'll just share. When I had a child come over, and they were white Christian homeschooler, and there were two images that we had to speak about that I really didn't know how to address. One, when we started to get into the conversation of what color Jesus was, my daughter just happened to bring that up, and that one was shocking for this child. It was almost traumatic. But equally as so was when we started talking about what color Martin Luther King was. Now, this should not be debatable, right? I mean, we know what color MLK was, but this child insisted, because he had never seen a picture of MLK, right, that he had to be white. Right? So this is really what we're fighting. And I know we'll talk about it a little bit later, but we have people from that ilk that are now in charge of education in Texas, right? We have a former Christian homeschooler, actually, she still homeschools now, that's in charge of education. That's what we're facing.
And Vic Wang, and that's a good segue to the next segment about our new Texas Texas chairperson for the school board, Donna Baharick. I don't know how to pronounce her name. Donna Baharick.
I think it's Baharick.
Bohorich?
That's usually
Okay.
how they say it in the meetings, I think.
Awesome. Okay, Vic.
Yeah, so, well, first, yeah, kind of a comment on the last thing we were talking about, but then I'll kind of tie that into the new state board chair. You know, I think there's definitely a tendency among people like us who live here in Texas, deep South, red state, dominated by right-wing Republican Christian fundamentalists, to be kind of resigned to the reality of all this and just kind of be like, oh, well, what can we do? You know, this is just how it is. There's not much, you know, what you can do about it. The reality is, I think, I didn't even realize this until recently, just how much of an aberration Texas specifically is when it comes to the things that we are talking about right here. There was a study recently about studied all 50 states, the social studies textbooks in all the different states. Guess where Texas ranked? Dead last. The most, in terms of how politicized the social studies curriculum, we ranked dead last. Guess who actually ranked very highly? Far higher. Actually, they ranked among the top in terms of how well, specifically, their social studies curriculum covered the Civil War and the causes of the Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement. South Carolina. They actually.
Is it Southern? Oh, South Carolina.
South Carolina actually ranked very highly. So, yeah, I think it's important to understand here, we are clearly an aberration here in Texas. It is not an inevitability that, you know, South Carolina, right there, that shows that you can accurately represent the history and not whitewash it, even here in the Deep South. As far as the new appointment to the state board, you know, again, back to Don McElroy, just as an example, you know, it's really sad that it seems that it's a prerequisite now to be a hardcore fundamentalist right-wing Christian Republican to even be eligible to be on the chairperson of the school board. When I actually had a chance, it was after I confronted him in the Q&A, I actually got to chat with him one-on-one for about 15, 20 minutes. And I called him out on the things he had said publicly, the things he had said in the documentary, specifically with regard to evolution and science. And the interesting thing there was he actually didn't even really contest hardly anything I said. Almost everything I said, he pretty much just conceded pretty much everything I said. I think the only real tangible thing that he really put forward was something about how mitochondria got into the cell or something. But my point is, and you know, he not only that, but he actually, we talked about different books on evolution, different authors, and he apparently has read many of them. He's very actually well educated on the topic of evolution and on science. And he even said this was actually the most revealing part of what he said. He actually said I challenged him for why he is attacking evolution for the weaknesses when look at what kind of weaknesses creationism has. And he actually said that he admitted that his views on that have huge weaknesses. That was actually the word he used. So I guess my point of all this is that I really got the sense that this is a guy who is clearly taking this position as this, you know, hardcore young earth creationist because he sees the political value in it. And we are continuing to see the political value in it. It is very, very advantageous for them to adopt that position as we're continuing to see.
Okay, exactly. And Jamie had a word, and then Zach.
I'm sorry. Was it me now? Okay, great.
Yes, it's Jamie. Yes.
So I know. I mean, clearly, I'm not worried that anybody here this evening is under some misapprehension about the dominant, nigh exclusive cause for the Civil War. But just for the sake of spectators, just for the sake of really highlighting the complete unambiguous nature of this, if I could, I'm just going to read a few very small portions out of the Declaration of Causes, which impelled the state of Texas to secede from the federal union. This came out February 2nd, 1861. This was, and anybody who's interested in this, you can get this off texas.gov. I mean, this is not hidden information. And this is just a very tiny portion. I'm going to nitpick a little here, but believe me when I say you can read the entire document. This is not quote mine. So referring to Texas, the quote begins, "She was received as a commonwealth holding, maintaining, and protecting the institution known as Negro slavery, the servitude of the African to the white race within her limits, a relation that had existed from the first settlement of her wilderness by the white race, and which her people intended should exist in all future time." Skipping ahead, talking about the relationship between the South and the North, for the avowed purpose, the North gaining power is what they're complaining about here, quote, "for the avowed purpose of acquiring sufficient power in the common government to use it as a means of destroying the institutions of Texas and her sister slaveholding states." And I'll skip ahead again. "In all the non-slaveholding states, in violation of that good faith and comity which should exist between entirely distinct nations, the people have formed themselves into a great sectional party, now strong enough in numbers to control the affairs of each of these states, based upon the unnatural feeling of hostility to these southern states for their beneficent and patriarchal system of African slavery, proclaiming the debasing doctrine of the equality of all men, irrespective of race or color, a doctrine at war with nature, in opposition to the experience of mankind, and in violation of the plainest revelations of the divine law." This is directly out of, this document was ratified, okay? This was the official document that came out that proclaimed the reasons with no ambiguity as to exactly why Texas, as an individual state, wanted to join with the Confederacy. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. The fact that any of this, I mean, if you're gonna decide just for terms of space what you're gonna leave out in a Texas history book, the fact that this should be left out is insanity.
And I'd like to throw something else in on there on that, if I may just jump in for a moment. I mean, Lilandra, in her testimony before the State Board of Education, had to explain to the Board of Education that you can't present a bias, that something that is overtly biased is inappropriate in lessons of history. And they objected to that. The Board of Education objected to that. I just want to make that point. I'll bow out.
Yeah.
They asked me if bias was an error.
No, I remember that.
And Mercer. Yeah. And Zack.
Yeah. I also remember them asking me and you and everyone else if we'd been paid to testify, which was a fun thing. But while we're on porridge, I think my favorite moment from the Texas history textbook hearings came actually over science books, or science information websites, which came along with one of the history textbooks that included dust mite reproduction and horseshoe crab orgies, according to one sort of right-winger who was testifying against them. And now, normally, when you hear sort of a crazy person going off about horseshoe crab orgies and how that might harm their children, you ignore them. But not Bahorich. She immediately demanded that before we adopt history textbooks, these websites needed to have their science sections blocked, so no young children would be exposed to horseshoe crab orgies in Texas. That was her thing.
I'm sorry to jump in, but I just wanted to throw in real quick. It's really interesting that they accuse you of being paid to testify, because just a few months ago, a good friend of mine was speaking to our local school board about their terrible sex education program, and she got put up all over the internet as, oh, this person isn't even really a parent, she's a plant by the Texas Freedom Network or something, which was a total lie. She has 2 kids in that school district. So it just seems to be a common method of operation.
Yeah, they were very glad to attack Kathy. The reason they were asking everyone was so they could justify themselves asking Kathy Miller if she was paid. And that was the big point. And so they just added on, well, why don't we ask everyone who's for good textbooks if they were paid off too?
Okay. Tim had a word. And then Alex.
Sure. We mentioned Donna Bahorich. So just to give a little, I guess, background on her, she's a Houston Republican who was newly appointed chair by to the State Board of Education. She has 3 kids that were homeschooled and then put in private school She's been on the board for a couple of years. She was a former communications director for Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. And then, probably not surprisingly, she is a proponent of traditional marriage and of abstinence-only education.
Okay. Vic Wang?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, actually, just to touch on the, and I noticed like a lot of the headlines on Donna Bohorich have been all about her, the fact that she homeschooled her kids, and then also sent them to religious private school, and so obviously had no experience with sending them to public schools, even though I think it's what 97% of Texas kids are in public schools. Anyway, I mean, I feel like that got a little bit sensationalized. I mean, it is kind of disturbing, but I think her record speaks for itself, regardless of, you know, I mean, hey, I saw that, who was the other guy on the school board? I forget who it was. He's like the one guy who's like reasonable. I'm sure Zach knows who I'm talking about. But he was actually suggesting that perhaps the head of the board should have must have kids or in the school system or a teacher or some kind of involvement. But you know, I thought that was a little. I mean, hey, I'd love to have Zack Kopplin as the head of the Texas school board, you know, and I assume he wouldn't qualify for that. So anyway, so that was one point I wanted to make there. But I think it was Russell that mentioned sex education, and I guess we haven't really talked about that so much yet, but I mean, we could have really devoted this whole thing just to that alone as far as just the sad state of sex education.
Oh yeah, I have a ton on that with a son that is just, you know, he just turned 13 and it's coming up.
Yeah, well, yeah, you know what, I guess I did want to share just one thing on that. I encourage anyone who's, to be honest, I was actually a little bit on the perhaps, I don't know, skeptical side when it came to some of the arguments regarding the harm of bad sex education. Just because, I don't know, I guess I've kind of felt that, hey, kids know at least the basics. You know, it's like, come on, it doesn't take that much to at least understand enough. Was kind of my mind. But I'll tell you one thing that really opened my eyes there. Just there was actually a recent article. It was an essay written by Amber Barnhill here in Texas, out in East Texas, Beaumont. She's been in the news quite a bit, actually, on separation of church and state issues. But this was actually something she wrote. It was a personal essay about her upbringing as a hardcore Christian fundamentalist who had absolutely no exposure to sex education. And it was really just incredibly eye-opening, incredibly tragic, very, very deeply personal story of how she just did not even know anything about the most basic aspects of sex education and how that affected her life. And it was very revealing, just you know, especially to think how many other kids are going through this because of just how politicized and ridiculous the sex education is in Texas.
Before I go to Jamie, I taught in West Texas, which has the second highest repeat teen pregnancy rate in Texas, which is saying something. That county does, Ector County. And they do know the basics of sex, evidently, or they wouldn't be having children again at that rate, right? But I sat in during their abstinence-only presenter, and she was talking about the male time, when the male was talking to the boys. He had them ask questions, and he asked them if one of the kids asked them if oral sex feels good. So this older gentleman with his pants pulled up over his navel, you know, from the 1950s, you know, got the engineer pocket protector, right? And he tells them no, because you worry about getting an STD the whole time. And yes, and the whole time, it's true, like the whole time they're emphasizing how condoms fail, so don't use condoms. So you're telling a whole bunch of teenagers not to use condoms. So you're wondering why we've got the STD problem and repeat pregnancies. So on the
say how sad I am for a guy who has never received a good blowjob in his life.
Yeah. On a more serious note, I realized I forgot to mention the name of the article Amber Barnhill had written. It was called "How Abstinence-Only Sex Education Led Me Down an Unexpected Path," and it was published at Friendly Atheist.
Yeah, I wanted to, if I may, share sort of an anecdote or two that I have with my teenage children going through the sex education curriculum and the atmosphere here in Texas. Now, my 14-year-old is a girl, my 13-year-old is a boy, and I get some interesting perspectives from both of them because my girl is Christian and my son is an atheist. And so when the paperwork came from the school last year about the sex education class, and you sign it and send it back, I didn't send it back. I went to the school the next day and I asked to see the curriculum for their sex education. And they handed me a folder and said, well, you're not allowed to take it out of this area. You just have to sit right there in that chair if you want to look at it, which was kind of a surreal experience. I'm in this gigantic room with one chair sort of up against a wall, and it's me and this binder. So I'm flipping through this curriculum, and I mean, there were a lot of things that really troubled me, but this is the one I want to focus on. Imagine, if you can, that you are a teenager already struggling with impulses and all the other hormonal fluctuations that all of us have had to deal with while going through the teenage years. Now, if you can, imagine on top of that you have the added difficulties that come with being a teenage girl in the kinds of environments that we have in the South especially, and that you're a Christian girl, and you're having sex education, and this line comes into play. If you get married and you've already had sex, you're really like a chewed up piece of bubble gum or an already used toothbrush. These are quotes. Now, I can't even fathom the kind of damage that could be done to a young person's view of intimacy or sexuality or self-expression when they are told these kinds of things about their bodies and how they should be connected to their bodies and their relationships with other people. I was so angry that I had to excuse myself from the school for a while and then come back to, as calmly as I could, tell them, my children will not be participating in this. And the only other option my kids had from not participating in the abstinence-only sex education was to sit in a room and do homework assignments.
That's awful. Yeah, Alex, you had a question?
Yeah, the question was, as we just celebrated marriage equality just not too long ago, and so we are dealing with more acceptance for the LGBT community. Has even the abstinence-only sex education? I don't even. It's hard to even say with a straight face. But has the curriculum been updated to talk to the LGBT community at all? We're completely ignoring them.
Well, that's a good question, but yeah, that's evidently the case, and that would be the purpose. They're going to want to ignore them. I mean, they don't want to address any actual problem to solve it. That's not what this educational system in the state is about, I'm sorry to say. Who else has had something?
I can say during both of the abstinence-only presentations I saw in 2006, none of them mentioned LGBT sex. And some districts in Texas do comprehensive sex ed now. It was the law. George Bush, when he was governor, had a law, and he funded a whole bunch of abstinence-only education. But that's changed, and so some districts do, but some districts still don't. It's not a mandatory thing, and it's possible that we might regress again and go back to abstinence only because of who we just voted in and elected in the last state election cycle. So who is next?
Oh, just a real quick thing on the whole, the point of LGBT and sex ed. It reminded me of there was a presentation at the Texas Secular Convention. I believe it was Dr. Mark Wiley was his name. he was talking about some of the absurdities in some of the sex education. The flat out
I think it was David Wiley.
Oh,
I've been
sorry,
talking
yes.
to him too.
Yes, that's right. That's right. I remember one of the stats he said he found this. I don't know if it was in Texas or where, but apparently it was in a actual sex ed curriculum that said it was over 50% of LGBT kids have STDs. That was actually taught.
Yeah, so I have been talking to David Wiley because he helped review a presentation I made to my son's school board. He basically had a sex education program called Austin Lifeguard, which was just basically ushered in by a group of people without any real review from any qualified educational professionals. And they said, like, you know, incredibly inaccurate stuff, and also some terribly misogynist stuff. Like they had, you know, something about how having sex with someone with a female condom is like having sex with a garbage bag, something like that. And they never brought up contraceptives except to specifically say they don't work, which is amazing because there's a direct correlation between, like somebody mentioned, what was it, second highest teen pregnancy rate here in Texas, repeat teen pregnancy rate, and there's a very clear line between teaching that stuff or not teaching contraceptives or actually teaching against their use and that repeat teen pregnancy rate. And I gave this information at my presentation, and it just went in one ear and out the other. And then I emailed the school board member that I thought seemed most reasonable in the presentation, and said, you know, what about all these statistics? And she said, I understand your concerns. Maybe you'd like to look at this program instead for your son. Of course, we can't teach it because it's explicitly from a Bible, you know, from a Bible-believing pastor. But we recommend that you present this privately to your son because it's better than the one that, you know, we slipped past the you know, the standards.
Why doesn't it bother anyone that we are that our schools, you know, that our facilities of education are deliberately deceiving students? Why is this not a moral outrage to lie to other people's children?
Oh, if you're not looking for an answer from a specific person, I'd love to jump in there. So obviously that sort of the answer is going to vary by community, but generally speaking, if your teachers come from, let's just say generally, the communities in which they are teaching, then generally speaking those teachers are going to, at least to some degree, reflect the leanings of the community. That's going to dull the response somewhat, but you're also talking about, very unfortunately, you're talking about in Texas an area where, I'm sorry, the vast majority of parents have very little ability to approach in a constructive way children are receiving. This is a state that I have run into fresh high school graduates as well as late 20-year-old, you know, individuals who looked at me with an utterly blank stare when the topic of World War II or Nazis or crematoriums or anything like that come up. I've had several individuals from 18 to 25, not hunting for them, it just happens in conversation, flat out tell me they had no idea what I was talking about when the subject of, for instance, World War II came up. Right? And so just try to imagine, that's not to say that doesn't even approach science education, where, again, I have to routinely supplement my children's education to, you know, make them aware that no, black holes are not just an idea that we have maybe somewhere, it's a neat idea, and no, it's, you know, God wouldn't do that sort of thing, it's all nonsense. So, I mean, you're talking about a wide gamut of subjects, which, I mean, in some cases, even teachers at the middle school level in some cases, aren't necessarily equipped to handle in a robust manner.
That's why we do custom supplement videos, my wife and I, because we know that there are some subjects that teachers just aren't capable of teaching, or at least not teaching very well. And so some of those sensitive subjects are the things that we're covering in our lesson plans. We're doing the national standards. We're covering everything that's supposed to be covered, but we're including the things that a lot of other teachers would have skipped over.
I just have a quick comment, I guess, on the front end. It seems like we're not educating them in proper sex ed, and then on the back end, Texas seems to be denying people and women health care and ability and access to it. So I feel like we're hurting them on the front end and the back end.
Okay. There was a question about what can we do about this, because there are a lot of concerned parents, and there are even concerned parents on this panel. Me and Arn have 2 kids in the system. With the history books, Arn and me have been going to two secular litigation organizations, and they were interested in perhaps suing the state of Texas over the history books. But what they said was they lacked the manpower, and it would be expensive because they're lying, and in order to prove that, they would have to use depositions, which is expensive and time-consuming. And it would be a really comprehensive case. And we're up against organizations, Christian organizations and conservative organizations that are really well-funded. And we're fighting fires all over the country. And look at Oklahoma. They just got the 10 Commandments removed from in front of their Capitol House. We still have 10 Commandments in front of the Texas Capitol building, and the Oklahoma Supreme Court ruled it wasn't in their Constitution. So does the governor there obey the Constitution? No, she says she's not going to move them. They're going to try to amend their Constitution. So. Everywhere, all over the United States. We're there. Zack Kopplin's there. Vic Wang's there. Everybody on the panel is there. Believe me, we're really into this. But we can only do so much. We only have 1 vote each, and people don't. In the last Texas election, we had 40% turnout, and because of gerrymandering, we need way more turnout from progressive voters than that in order to stop these people from coming in. We can't keep putting out all the fires. They're going to get, especially 2016, if they get a president that appoints a bunch of conservative judges, we're doomed. Now, a lot of things we take for granted. A lot of things we take for granted. They'll be able to do with impunity, and so one of the things we need to do is talk about why do we think I could start them off even with this election. They say the progressives are not progressive enough for them to vote for them. So I mean, by default, that means you're helping regressive politicians win. So there's one reason. I don't know who wants to go next.
Yeah, I want to mention that we're going to go a little bit over time today because we've got 8 different people on the panel, and there's an awful lot to discuss in this. So it is going to be a little bit longer show than normal. And anybody that needs to drop out is certainly welcome to, but we are going to continue a little bit.
I think I'll jump in and then I'm going to have to go, but I think the big thing actually we can do, at least on the history textbooks immediately, is get school districts to publicly throw them out, or publicly at least say we will not teach this section, we're going to teach good material. And a bit of precedent for that's in Louisiana, in New Orleans, where we actually banned creationist textbooks in New Orleans. We also banned, y'all may appreciate this, Texas-style history textbooks. Were explicitly banned from New Orleans schools by the school board. And we can HISD could ban history textbooks that don't approach the Civil War and slavery properly. That's doable. We can do that district by district and at least create a bit of a firewall for good textbooks.
Yeah, and if, that's a good point, and I do see the possible danger, as was mentioned earlier, of having those localized power struggles with the curriculum, and then you've got these smaller communities, that are not Austin or what have you, stuck with the more conservative curriculum. I see that as a danger, but my idea is, from my perspective, I agree with you, Zach, that we do the district by district thing to get the more ridiculous curriculum thrown out, and if that sets off some sort of chain reaction where local groups that are very conservative wind up whitewashing curriculum, then we can use federal law via the Constitution to eliminate things like the religious bias and things like that to the extent that we can. It's not a perfect solution, but we've got to we have to do what we can. But before you jump away, I'm not sure when you are, Zach, I thought you would appreciate this. I read an article from Diana Ray from the Houston Press that was published just today, on July 9th, 2015, and she was talking about of course, this sort of textbook controversy, and my very favorite portion of her article was when she said, in reference to the quality of the curriculum that the new textbooks represent, they'd have done better if they actually hired cats to do an interpretive dance of all of history for every Texas student.
Yeah. Well, I'll jump in the last thing right before I leave and say we actually, in some cases, we had used car salesmen and pastors decide our history and science curriculums in part. And so basically, in terms of expertise, like we had a bunch of cats do it. Anyway, I'm out, guys. Thank y'all so much for having me on.
Thank you, Zach.
Thanks, Zach.
Yeah.
Bye, Zach.
I would.
Done. I thought he'd never leave.
I would say that I see too much of a trend, like a very depressing trend among my liberal friends who agree with me ideologically, but have this sort of bar of perfection for candidates they vote for, where if none of the candidates running is exactly what they want on all possible issues, then they say, I won't vote for them because it's the lesser of two evils. And it's really depressing because the way that these school board members get elected is that they all vote as a block. And I have no idea whether right-wing Christians consider every single candidate absolutely perfect for them, but they absolutely do get told how to vote, and they vote. And being a gamer, it is my firm belief that when you see a strategy which is working, if you are at all interested in playing to win, then you should imitate that strategy. And it's really important that people on the right side who actually care about proper science education not only vote for the candidate who is best, and I'm not at all talking about voting for the lesser of two evils, because I think when you take a look at the candidates, you'll find that one of them often it really isn't evil. So vote for the one that is most likely to advance your goals, and people on the right side of science education and sex education ought to be running more. I would back that up. Yeah.
Yeah, so if I may, what we really need is a secular version of a Southern strategy, right? So that we can begin to roll back a lot of the progress that the religious right and the former Dixiecrats have had. I mean, we're talking about a strategy that has had, really implicit impact and effect on the southern states. I mean, this goes back to 1964, or 1954, where it was a grassroots movement. Take it back and begin to argue with different words and different language. In the African American community, we are having a lot of that conversation now, especially when we start looking at what candidates we can vote for. It's actually interesting that Russell was talking about how liberals vote and the lesser of two evils. We're arguing within the African American community on who we do want to potentially vote for, or whether it makes sense to abstain so that people actually hear. And I think we hear a lot of that with liberal voters as well. Now, unfortunately, the issue is we're gambling with a lot, right? That's at stake. We're not just talking about 4 years. We're talking about potentially 8 years, and for 4 years of damage, it can take us 10 to 12 years, as we've seen in the Bush eras. For every year he's there, it's taking us 2, 3 years to undo that harm. So we tend to forget the power of our voices and our collective bargaining power when it comes to secularism. I mean, we're talking about 30% according to the Pew poll, right? I mean, that's almost as large as several. It's not Baptist size, right? But it's close to Catholic size. It's larger than Jewish size, and they do tend to vote a particular way. So why shouldn't we? Why can't we organize and fly behind the secular banner?
I think that's.
Yeah, I'm completely behind you, Alex, but I think it's all predetermined. I mean, Tim Crookham, you're representing the Hispanic community at this point, and you're surely going to vote for Donald Trump because he said you were going to win your vote, right?
I think that's a hell no.
Right. Maybe we got a chance then.
Alex is right, and we are a larger demographic, even in Texas, than the Jewish vote. But the Jewish voice is represented way more in politics than the non-believing voice. And
the biggest problem that we had, and I'm sorry to jump in on you, but I know you're going to be making the same point. The biggest problem that we had in the last election was all the people in our faction, in our, our political clique, if you will, that were saying that that they're not going to vote because it's a defective system and it won't. Your vote doesn't count. Well, the votes didn't count because 60% of the people decided that the votes weren't going to count, because and every time there's a low vote gets the all those votes did count in.
I think we're breaking him up. Lilandra,
We have them to thank for the situation that we're in now.
Yeah, and a lot of the damage has already been done. There are 9 abortion clinics left open in Texas right now, and that's being held by hook and crook by an injunction from the Supreme Court. And everybody needs the help of people voting. And some people think that their vote doesn't matter in Texas because Texas is a red state, but Texas I believe about 5 years ago, passed a 50% minority population here. So people need to let go of the kind of Stockholm syndrome that I live in a red state and I'm not going to matter. They've been so beat down in the state that they need to understand that everybody's vote counts. And there's a whole big idiot movement Russell Brand used to champion about not voting at all. Because that's your statement. You're not going to participate in the corrupt system. And now he's taking that back after the UK got swept by the Conservatives. So quit it. Help us out here. Who was next? Alex?
Yeah, I think Alex and I were off camera trying to compete as to which one of us could be nicer to the other.
Go ahead, Jamie. Go ahead. I'll be nicer. There you go.
All right, thank you. I wanted to touch on the idea of, the lesser of two evils, and Russell and I were also sort of chatting off camera, and I'll just share kind of my view of it, because as far as like voting for the lesser of two evils, because I guarantee you, I can come close to guaranteeing you that I am farther left than anyone here. I'm almost like young Hitchens Marxist, so I'm pretty sure that very few people here, although perhaps I'm wrong, are as far down that rabbit hole as I am. And this is my view of it. I have to accept that my viewpoint in toto is simply not shared with some sort of large, powerful block entity. Because of that, I have to do what I can do, and that just means being more strategic. And for me, what that means in this case is I vote on individual issues, aligning myself with groups that I can align with on individual issues, both to create cultural change and to create political change. So to analogize, I'm sort of like the high school kid that doesn't have his own clique. I walk between cliques depending on what conversation I'm in. Now, this has two good things about it in my view. One, this is how politics works. You move from group to group and you find the common ground. And two, I can do that and be honest about it. I'm not lying to these groups, because I never go to one group and say, I agree with everything you're saying, and then go to the next group and say, no, I agree with everything you're saying. I'm honest with these groups about what I agree and don't agree with them. And so, in my view, it's politics in the way it's supposed to be done, which is finding a common ground, but being honest about where the line is for you, and doing what you can to wed cultural changes to back political changes at a local level.
Was it Alex next?
No,
Mr.
actually,
Alex?
Jamie actually covered
Jamie.
some of the things that I wanted to, so I think I'm good.
I can jump in here real quick. I think maybe, hopefully in the future, if the right wing, I guess Republican, continues to distance themselves from the growing minority population, hopefully in the future we'll have a more of a shift or more moderation. And I guess as far as candidates for the school board, if there's some way we can encourage more moderation, people to run, and more people whose interests align like ours to vote, then maybe we can move the needle.
Yeah, I definitely think that the Republican strategy for a lot of years is to divide up people into us versus them a lot. But the problem they've been running into is that the alleged us has been getting smaller and smaller. So, they go after women, and women are becoming more and more active and outspoken, and a larger proportion of women are voting. They go after minorities. There's been some speculation that like the Hispanic population will tip the scales in favor of Texas going blue within the next decade. That sounds super optimistic to me. But, they go after atheists, and I'm sure we've all seen the statistics that people with no faith have risen to something like 30%, was it now? I forget the last statistics I saw, but I mean it's been going up just regularly since the internet showed up in the 90s, and I think that in an uncharacteristically optimistic way of looking at things for me, I don't know that they can really sustain this election strategy of dividing people up. I think they're going to find that this little area that they've carved out is just too small to stand on. They didn't come close in the last two presidential elections, and I certainly don't see anyone who I think will come close this time.
Okay, and was what I think I started with the people that
Uh-oh.
I think we lost her for a second, I might just jump in and say, well, hopefully, as Russell was saying, or reminded me, we do have, I guess, the internet, and hopefully the internet will become more of a player in information to people, so that they're not as reliant on the authority to teach them things, but hopefully they'll be more inquisitive and have the access to the information they need.
Yeah, I want to say, just before it slips my mind, if I could, that I had the view for a long time of, why vote, lesser of two evils was a game I didn't want to play, and this sort of viewpoint. But the votes don't count until they count, and that sounds like just a useless truism, except we're talking about sociology here. We're talking about cultural change. And so there is, however difficult it may be to define, there is some scale where there is growth in the number of people supporting a particular cause or a particular viewpoint, and however difficult it may be to see that growth, or perhaps even impossible to see that growth, what happens in terms of sociology is it does reach some kind of breaking point, and wherever that breaking point is, then it shoots forward, and we don't know where that breaking point is. So to me, I lack the information to say where the breaking point is, and since I have no evidence to say it's one place or the other, it seems like the only standard I can use to make the choice is pragmatism, and that means I choose to be optimistic. So,
what you said kind of reminded me of one of the there was a study recently that with regard to voter turnout, the psychology of voter turnout. It's kind of completely the opposite of what you might think. It's what they found was that the more people that you know who vote, the more people you perceive are voting, the more likely you are to vote, even though technically that's actually diluting the value of your vote, and vice versa. If other people don't vote, you perceive that other people aren't voting, then instead of thinking, oh, well, that means my vote counts more, I'll vote, people do the opposite. So what that means essentially is the more you, when you vote and you make it known that you vote, you are not just casting your vote, but you are also contributing to helping induce other people to do the same.
People who their votes have been suppressed, and you're voting for people who can't make it, perhaps because of disability or economic inability, who have to work and can't work it in. So everybody who can vote has to vote. And the last thing we want to talk about, if everybody can still hear me, is whether we should organize as a secular voting rally before the elections. What do you guys? We could do group activities at the lower, or we could actually, or both, or we could rally in Austin and do a march around Austin to show politicians that we're here, that secular voices matter. What do you guys think?
I'd just say real quick that I think that one of the reasons we've made strides, when I say we, I just mean the atheist communities, plural. I don't like to talk about us as a monolith, but is because we have been willing to stand up when we can individually. And I think everyone here knows that one of the double-edged sword of ourselves and our friends and our communities is that we are individualistic, and that's great, but it's also like herding cats, and that it can be really, really, really difficult to get large numbers of us mobilized, and sort of aimed in a direction narrow enough to really crack a shield. But how to fix that problem? I don't know. I almost wish that somehow there could be some, legion of anti-doom of atheists to come together, and we could all just agree, okay, look, there's 15,000 of our communities here, and so who wants to deal with focusing on cultural change in your neighborhood? Cool. Who wants to deal with economic change? Okay, cool. And then somehow, we build that mosaic. But again, that assumes that somebody or somebodies are able to step up and be a voice to at least start that process in a way that the other groups can jump up and say, yeah, sure, let's listen to this. And it's I mean, if you can figure that out, believe me, you're more clever than I am.
Is Arn frozen?
There is a there is.
Yeah.
There is a secular. Yeah, there is a Secular Coalition of America, and I know they have a Texas part of it whose job was to sort of get people involved within state by state, so within Texas. So that might be a decent resource.
Yeah, I just want to say.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to just real quick and say.
So you were saying, Tim, there's a secular group that organizes secular voters across the country?
Yeah,
in Texas?
Secular.org is the website, and they do that's sort of the national lobbying group in D.C., and then they have, I think, a Texas branch, but I think maybe Jamie, do you know some more about that?
Yeah, they do. I can't remember the date. I can't pull it out of the back of my head just right at the moment. But I was on that phone call when the SCA announced, we're gonna make phone calls in this state on this date, in this state on this date, and if you wanted to be sort of a part of the foundation building exercise of the SCA's chapter in that state, be on this number conference call at this time. And anyway, I was on that, and so. Officially speaking, the Texas SCA state chapter has been going for a while. There's still some struggles in terms of building something like powerful enough, to really sort of have a mechanism to turn on Texas. But I have seen some local movement in different communities, and I think you're absolutely right that it shows incredible promise, and I hope that that's sort of the answer to my non-prayers.
So, are we done?
I think where's Arn? Or
Yep, no, he just dropped out. Maybe Lilandra should take us out.
Yeah.
You there?
I think she can hear us.
But I've done this before. So that's our show. Thanks for watching.
I'm sorry, I don't know what Arn's doing. He's in the other room. But anyways, so let's go ahead and close out the show, and we'll talk after the show about maybe some other things that we could do. I'm hoping that Arn has just entered. He's been popping in and out the whole show, so I don't know what's up with that.
Back now.
Well, I'll say, for anyone that can hear me, thanks everyone. I love doing this. If I was independently wealthy, I would do it half the time, and the other half the time I teach martial arts for free. But as it turns out, I'm poor. So I guess I'll just stick with my teaching and my research. So anyway, thanks everyone, and I appreciate it. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks, man. Good job, everyone.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. But
okay.
Oh well, I hear
Thank you
you
for
on a
answering.
delay. but I'm getting pretty tired. The sending out messages, or I would love to help out with a rally, but like email what you think about. So I'm gonna get going. Good night.
All right, good night, man.
All right.
For a little bit long.
I guess I will be dropping off as well.
I'll explain why when we close the show for a bit. If you're welcome to anyway. But I'm going to go ahead and close the show now, and I thank everybody for watching. And we will give updates on. Thank you for watching.